It was a big place and you had to admit, an impressive one. For some inexplicable reason, the modern exterior hid an interior done in the style of an old baronial castle, like those lavish sets you sometimes see in the cinema. It's basically a Victorian interpretation of the perfect medieval castle. After all, in the good old days, they didn't have the technology to build such large and extravagant buildings. One thing I knew for sure, the wedding wouldn't have taken place in such a place if I was paying the expenses. But my ex-wife Shauna had made sure that wouldn't happen years ago. I thought I had found a safe haven in the pseudo-minstrels gallery, which served as both a floodlight tower and a projection room, from which I could watch the ceremony, but not be seen by anyone in the main hall downstairs. I was well aware that my presence, if made known, would be controversial to say the least, and would surely lead to an unpleasant confrontation between me and my former in-laws. Besides, I was sure my daughter would be less than thrilled if it happened. I even surmised that Tamsin would be even less pleased to learn of my presence than Veach and George, her crony husband. Anyway, I was sitting in silence, lurking at the back of the minstrel's gallery from where I could watch my estranged daughter's wedding, when suddenly a voice whispered directly into my ear. "Hello, pretty boy. I thought you wouldn't miss this little celebration." To say the sound of that voice made me wince is an understatement. I literally jumped off the fishing stool I was sitting on and collapsed to the floor. Well, yes. If I'd been sitting on that little stool and watching this service through the bars of the balustrade, I would have thought there would have been less chance of someone noticing me. The rumble that the little aluminium stool made as it fell to the stone floor of the minstrel's gallery and then rolled across it had to be seen to be believed. I realized that any chance of my presence remaining a secret had instantly evaporated. From my new position, lying on my back on the floor, I raised my head and saw Trouble towering over me. My daughter's aunt, looking very embarrassed, was making frantic apologetic hand gestures towards the hall below. Megan, or Trouble, as I had jokingly nicknamed her in my youth, was, or rather already was, my ex-wife's mischievous younger sister. Megan was often the bane of our courtship. Peeking between the bars of the balustrade, I realized that my hiding place had suddenly become the center of attention for almost everyone in the building. The bride, groom, celebrant, photographer, choir, cameraman, and most of the congregation were looking at Megan with an annoyed and/or somewhat puzzled expression on their faces. So I pressed myself to the floor as hard as I could and prayed that no one else would notice me. Then Megan, signaling that the service was continuing, picked up my little stool and delicately lowered her cute little tummy onto it. From my recumbent position, I could no longer see the floor of the main hall, but I could almost hear what was going on downstairs and soon realized that the wedding service had resumed. I hoped that the incident had been written off as one of Megan's pranks. Megan's penchant for unusual behavior and surprises was legendary in our family, even when she was a child. "It's okay, you can watch now," Megan whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you jump, Billy." "You made me jump, woman. You almost gave me a heart attack. Where did you learn to sneak around like that, Megan?" I whispered, maneuvering to watch what was happening below. It became clear to me that I had temporarily lost the use of my little stool. "Oh, I kinda learned that as a kid by sneaking up on a couple of familiar lovers." She lowered her gaze and winked at me. "You're a feisty little monkey." "I'm not so little anymore, Billy boy. Just watch your step or you might find yourself raped later." "Oh no, I won't, Megan. I'll take the number 4:30 train and leave this bleeding hole." Megan looked down at me again, made a strange but strangely familiar gesture with her eyes that I thought meant, "That's what you think," and then made a hand gesture towards the platform below. With that, she let me know that the conversation was cut off until after the ceremony. I'd always liked Shauna's little sister. Yes, sometimes she was a real pain in the arse when Shauna and I were courting her, but Shauna was always less tolerant about his antics than I was. Megan always struck me as a good-hearted kid who needed attention. There was a good 4 years between the two sisters, a recipe for strife like never before. I always thought Megan just didn't understand that her older sister, and me included, needed privacy from time to time. The service ended, and I tried my best to get a glimpse of the groom as he led Tamsin out of the hall. Not that the angle of view made it an easy task if I was going to stay out of sight. As far as I could judge the guy, he seemed like a decent enough person. Thankfully, everyone was so focused on the bride and groom that I don't think anyone even glanced at the minstrel galley. But as soon as the motorcade was out of sight below us, Megan started trying to drag me to my feet. Come on, Billy, we'd better get down to the dining room. I resisted, tugging furiously on Megan's arm, trying to remain unnoticed until all the guests had left the room. No way in hell Megan is going to show up at this party. Oh my god, I'm going to jail. Don't be ridiculous, Billy. It's your own daughter's wedding. Why would the police arrest you? Well, that bleeding restraining order for starters, I muttered. No, Billy. Shauna's already dead and she's the only person named in the restraining order. When he killed her, the order immediately became null and void. What do you mean he killed her? I demanded, almost jumping to my feet. It was an accident, wasn't it? Billy, that bloody cretin always drove like a bloody idiot. And he still drives like an idiot. That weirdo. Every time he gets behind the wheel, there's an accident waiting for him. Do you have any idea how fast he was going that day? I know very little about that, Megan. I saw skid marks on the road, Billy. He drove like a bloodthirsty idiot that night, just like he always does. I just can't understand how he hasn't been brought to justice for my sister's murder yet. Even Tamsin knows who's responsible for her mother's death. You may have noticed he wasn't here today. He wasn't invited. Neither was I, Megan. Yes, he was, in a way. I just couldn't find you to let you know about it. Look, my invitation says Miss Megan Stone and a guest. No reservations or anything. Guess who's going to be my guest? I laughed out loud. You've got to be kidding, Megan. I'm going to show up at Stone's wedding? I've been there once before, remember, my girlfriend? And you remember how that ended. The fact that my sister was a dumb cow has nothing to do with it, Billy. You're Tamsin's father, and Christ, you were supposed to be there today, giving her away in marriage, not her grandfather. Now you and I are going to the reception together, and I don't want to hear any nonsense about restraining orders. My Uncle Albert assures me that there is not a single legitimate reason why you should not attend the reception as my guest. What's more, he thinks it's a damn good idea. He's always been in your camp, you know, even when things went wrong. And here I was wondering why that old bastard doesn't represent Shauna's interests, I commented. Look, Billy, if my Uncle Albert thought he could get away with it, I'm damn sure he'd be representing your interests for free. He was totally unimpressed with my sister's behavior at the time and took a very tough stance towards her and my mom and dad. He outright refused to represent Shauna's interests. As far as I know, he and my mom haven't said two polite words to each other since. The only time I saw them together in the same room was at Shauna's funeral. I think Uncle Albert was a little disappointed that you didn't come that day. I wasn't even in Megan's country. I was helping a group that was taking pictures of the fauna and flora of South Georgia. Since those people were trapped there during the Argentine invasion, they preferred that we stay off the ship if possible. Anyway, I knew nothing about Shona's accident until 3 months after her funeral when we returned to the UK. I met Toby, what's-his-name, there in Falmouth, and he told me about the accident. While I listened to the explanation, Megan lifted me to my feet and started dusting off my whistle. No, that's my suit. God, what a mind some people have, I ask you. Come on, Billy, Megan continued. Let's go down to the front desk before the reception queue dissipates. From the way Megan squeezed my hand tightly, I realized that, whether I liked the idea or not, Megan had decided that I would attend her daughter's wedding reception. Against my better judgment, I admitted defeat. I had to admit that it was probably due to the large amount of alcohol I had consumed in the previous 24 hours. It clouded my judgment to the point where I gave in to Megan's desires. Yeah, look, I'd better explain. When Shauna and I first, broke up, I have to admit I didn't behave as well as I could have. I ended up having to spend more than one day visiting the American authorities, or local law enforcement anyway, when I decided to get a little revenge. I made a little fun of the new man in Shauna's life. It may have been a frivolous and somewhat enjoyable thing to do, but it ended up being very misguided. The confrontation didn't end the way I expected, and I got a thorough kick up the arse as a result. Unfortunately, Shauna somehow got caught up in the mess, resulting in a visit to the nearest emergency hospital, as the Yanks like to put it. Hence my imprisonment and the numerous court orders both in the US and the UK, forbidding me to go within a mile of Shauna's whereabouts at any or almost any time. Be that as it may, I can assure the reader that I personally have never laid a finger on my unfaithful wife. To the best of my knowledge, not once. This statement, I'm sure, will become clearer to you later. Where was I? Oh, yes. Anyway, after the trial, I became an ex-convict, as the Yanks like to call us, and was branded as a bully and wife-beater. And after the fight, I was unceremoniously stripped of my parental rights to our daughter Tamsin. Incidentally, almost all of this happened while I was still in an American prison. Not a pleasant experience, I assure you. In fact, at that point in my life, nothing was pleasant at all, and the stigma of being an ex-convict was not very conducive to my working career. Try getting a work visa to the United States with a record like that. None of this, however, stopped Shauna, with the help of the British legal system, from demanding that I financially support Tamsin until the child turns 18. I'm not very proud of what I have to admit. After the system kicked my arse so effectively, I consoled myself with booze for a while. However, I managed not to turn into a complete slacker or a hardened alcoholic. But that was probably due to inherited biological traits rather than any kind of mental impulse, if you know what I mean. However, I still needed something to help me face the day in the best possible way. Are you still in the film industry, Billy? Megan asked, leading a slightly unsure me. We were slowly making our way forward, up the stairs to the main lobby of the venue. No, not really, Megan, I replied. I guess you could say I'm in the transport business now. Most of the time I work as a sailor on research vessels and the like, although I do take quite a few photographs. I think it's good for them to have a backup or second experienced cameraman on board to help document what's going on. Sometimes I'm the only cameraman on board. So you've given up on Hollywood? Megan, I never worked for any of the big guys. The most I was capable of was being a second cameraman, and that was on some pretty mediocre third-rate films. Unfortunately for me, my wife had much more success with directors and producers than I did. Shauna always wanted to be a star, Billy. You knew that even before you married her. Yeah, but I didn't realize how far she'd go to realize her dream. Hell, look at this pile. We found ourselves in the hotel lobby, which we had to walk through to get to the entrance to the hall where Tamsin's wedding reception was being held. The huge room was filled with guests patiently waiting their turn for the formal reception. I realized that the witch, Megan and Shauna's mother, had planned the show and made all the arrangements. The witch has an even greater megalomania than my ex-wife. The witch planned and organized our weddings, even though they were not on the same scale as this celebration. I should add that the witch and I have never been members of each other's respective fan clubs, so I surmised that my appearance at this reception might prove disastrously unsuccessful. Finding myself anonymously in the crowd stopped me feeling so vulnerable, defenseless. Although more than one of our guests' relatives quickly joined in the conversation recognizing me, probably from Shauna's wedding and my own a few years before. I also knew I had a few allies, but they would be kept a closely guarded secret. The Stones were a pretty close-knit clan. Eventually, the crowd began to thin, and the witch finally spotted me from her seat a little further back from the receiving line. Her face instantly turned crimson, and for a moment I thought smoke was coming out of her ears. Though I protested, Megan dragged me through the entrance to the conference room and to the front of the reception line. Tamsin's new husband was stunned for a moment when Megan introduced him to the father of her bride. The poor guy didn't know what to do or say. I shook his very weak hand. Tamsin was just as stunned, if not more so. As I looked into her eyes, they got bigger and bigger, and I was afraid they were about to pop out of her skull. You know, I really think the guy had no idea who I was until he heard Aunt Megan inform her new spouse that I was Tamsin's father. For some inexplicable reason, I decided to say, "Hey, baby. It's been a long time since I've held you on my lap." Then I took her outstretched hand and kissed the back of it. Yes, I considered hugging Tamsin, but I was afraid she might faint if I did. Tamsin's response boiled down to the following. But, until Megan nudged me with her elbow. The next person to catch my eye was Vitch's mate George. He recognized me and handled the situation pretty well. Well, that's what I thought. William, we weren't, well, this is an unexpected surprise. How did you... Billy is my incoming father. If he's coming, I'm coming, Megan commanded, sitting down next to me. I wondered if Megan had talked to Tamsin. It seemed to me that there just wasn't time for that. I wouldn't think that for a second, Megan. The old lady replied, "Of course William is welcome here. I was just surprised he was in the village." Your mother assured me he was working somewhere on the Antipodes now. I was working in Antarctica, sir. I have no idea why I addressed the bastard as sir. Probably habit. My ship docked in New Zealand 5 weeks ago, I informed the old man. You see, Megan, your mother has been trying to contact William. You got her message, I believe, William. Your mother told you she would contact William, Megan. You are very welcome here today, my boy. George shifted his gaze from me to Megan as he spoke. Whatever he said, I was sure there was no message. In the age of modern electronic communications, things are pretty good, only occasionally interrupted by extremely bad weather on coastal Bass. So despite all the old man's assurances to the contrary, I was certain that I had never been included on the guest list, even tentatively. I was convinced of this by the fact that my ex-mother-in-law had disappeared from the waiting list by the time we got to her house. I even wondered if she'd rushed off to call the police or something. Tamsin's new in-laws were polite, pleasant, and obviously very embarrassed. They didn't look like they'd seen a ghost. Better to say they were shocked to find themselves shaking hands with one of them. It was all quite amusing from my point of view, but I wondered what exactly they had been told about Tamsin's father. Most of the other guests had no idea who I was and looked at us curiously, probably wanting to understand why Megan had chosen to watch the wedding ceremony from the minstrel's gallery. As we left the reception hall, like everyone else, I took a glass of fizz from a passing waitress and drank it in one gulp. Megan explicitly told me to slow down as I took a second glass. Then the imposing figure of Sir Albert Stone appeared through the crowd. I even wondered why Uncle Albert hadn't been included among the guests. After all, he was the patriarch of the whole damn clan. William, my boy, how nice to see you here today. Hyacintha, the witch, led me to believe that you were abroad and unable to attend, Albert said, extending his hand for me to shake. I can't say I've always liked that old geezer. Megan's Uncle Albert is a barrister by vocation, and he always seemed too formal for my liking. In my youth, I had a natural dislike for his type, an aversion which has since been somewhat strengthened by my encounters with members of the legal profession. However, Megan had hinted that this old geezer had sided with me during the collapse of my marriage. As a result, I was forced to do a quick reassessment of my feelings towards this character. How do you do, sir? I replied, shaking his hand. Glad to meet you again. Capital, capital. Albert grinned back. I'm not quite sure what the phrase capital, capital, capital is supposed to mean or imply, but I know from memory that it was Uncle Albert's usual response to almost everything he was told, provided everything went the way the old bugger wanted it to. That is, the way he wanted it to. At this point, Tamsin appeared in front of me, her duties on the receiving line having evidently been fulfilled. In fact, completely forgetting her manners, Tamsin rather rudely elbowed her way between Uncle Albert and me. The look on Tamsin's face I can only describe as an expression of utter disgust. You don't have everyone at home here. What do you want to get, some kind of handout or something, or do you just want to embarrass me? Tamsin asked, though surprisingly quietly. I suppose I should point out that Tamsin's words and the way she said them were taken straight from the witch's repertoire. It wasn't my daughter who spoke to me. It was Tamsin, who had been brainwashed by the witch since she was born. The realization disappointed me, but I didn't resent Tamsin's attitude towards me. It only confirmed that it was just as I'd assumed. I shifted my gaze from my daughter to Albert and then to Megan, who was standing next to me. I told you this was a bad idea, Megan. I'd better go, I said and turned to leave. No, wait a minute, young man, Albert exclaimed, loud enough to get the attention of almost everyone standing around him, and commanding enough to make me stop instantly. I turned around, wondering what the old man would say. Tamsin, your father traveled almost halfway around the world to be here with you on this special day for you. The least you can do is be polite to him. In fact, Albert's statement is not true. I almost always spent the summer months in the UK. Most of my work on ships and natural history took place in Antarctic waters, but there's not much going on there at this time of year. My daughter looked, well, I don't know exactly, puzzled, I guess you could say. She shifted her gaze from me to my uncle, to everyone watching, and then back to me again. Then she said, I'm sorry. Father, your unexpected presence has taken me by surprise. You have never shown any interest in my life. And where did you get that idea, Tamsin? Albert growled. I must tell you, young lady, that your father has watched your development very closely. He has risked arrest more than once to witness important events in your life. Isn't that right, young man? I'm sorry, sir, I started to reply, but Albert, unable to hold back, continued speaking. Prize distribution to that bloody, stupid, expensive school your mother insisted on sending you to. I am reliably informed that your father attended every one of them. He was also at your graduation from university. Damn it, girl. You walked past your father to get your diploma without even noticing him. He knew who you were, but you didn't recognize him. Don't forget your mother recognized him too, and that probably saved your father from a visit to the local justice of the peace. I didn't know you were there, Uncle Albert. Tasneem took a chance. I wasn't, Tamsin. At least not as regularly as I'd like. Your mother and I have had our differences, you know we have. But I have people who have been wary of your development all these years, and they might have recognized your father. And none of them could have accidentally broken your father's cover, could they? With your mother around, your father's presence was technically illegal. I would advise you, Tamsin, to smile sweetly and forget about your supposed disagreement with your father. I assure you or rather, your father's reputation in your eyes, has always been a victim of circumstance coupled with your late mother's extremely poor judgment. Let's have a family truce on this special day, shall we? By this time, my daughter was looking rather embarrassed. If you insist, Uncle, Tamsin agreed, and then added, but I wonder what reason he has for coming here today. Tamsin then turned her back to me and disappeared into the crowd. After watching her leave, Albert turned to me. William, I'm afraid your daughter has only heard a one-sided account of her parents' divorce. It didn't help that you and Hyacintha didn't get along from the start either. I was never good enough for Shauna in her mother's eyes, sir, I replied. No one could ever be good enough for Hyacinth, William. I don't think even my brother fits that description in my sister-in-law's eyes. It appeared, however, that Hyacinth had already given up. She's up there on the platform, apparently rearranging the seats at the top table. When I looked closer, it turned out that the witch, assisted by her perpetually awkward husband, George, was indeed rearranging the serving pieces. As we watched, I noticed one of the photographers approaching them. The witch spoke to him briefly, and then Hyacintha was clearly pleased with her rearrangements. The small entourage left the platform. They're getting ready for a group shot, Billy. We'd better go, Megan informed me quietly. No, you go, Megan. Tamsin won't be thrilled with my presence. Besides, without the monkey outfit, I'll look completely out of place in the pictures. It'll ruin the whole set. Billy, don't argue, Megan. I'm on the verge of walking out anyway. I knew it was a bad idea. After a few more protests from not only Megan, but also her Uncle Albert, they left me alone and went outside for a photo shoot. To my relief, almost all the other guests also went out into the hotel garden to watch or participate. I took this opportunity to sneak onto the platform and have a bit of a frolic. Of course, the witch had seated me next to Tamsin's new husband. But given my daughter's behavior and the fact that I'd never met this young man before, I figured it could lead to trouble. Besides Megan, Uncle Albert and his wife, apparently my only open allies, sat at the end of the table. So I sat Grandpa Tamsin in that seat, since I suspected that was where he had originally planned to sit. Then I placed my own, hastily scribbled, card next to Megan's card at the end of the table. I decided it would be safer that way. After returning from the photo shoot, Megan briefly slipped into spoilt child mode. I hadn't seen her in that state in a while, and I thought it was funny. I decided that my refusal to participate in the photo shoot was the reason. If you keep acting like this, I'm going to go find a bar, was all I managed to say to put an end to Megan's feigned protest. Just try to dare and Megan replied. So what are you going to do, Megan? I asked. I'm not sure. Maybe kiss you. I've always wanted to do that, but I've never had the courage. I always knew Shauna's little sister was holding a candle for me, but I was surprised to hear Megan say that she was still carrying that torch. Oh my God, Megan, I thought you'd grown out of silly teenage crushes a long time ago. Yes, I have grown up. I even found what I thought was the man of my dreams. But I soon discovered that all that glitters is not gold, and what you see is not always what you get. It was not until I divorced that rascal that I realized exactly what my sister had so carelessly discarded. I'm not at all sure I understand what you meant, Megan. Okay, a confused person is safe. She grinned. Come on, it looks like they're sitting down to eat. The top table was unusually long, and Megan and her guest had originally sat somewhat lower in rank. Although the witch had rearranged things, I had, to the old bitch's dismay, canceled her changes. Great fun, it seemed to me. The witch seemed to accept my rearrangement without protest, but threw me a baleful glare. Albert sat down next to Megan. I thought Hyacinth, he began as we took our seats. I thought her original plan would prove more diplomatic, sir. I interrupted him. With a capital letter, I always knew Hyacintha was wrong about you, my boy. Anyway, drop the formalities, please. To the family, I am Bertie. Throughout most of the meal, Albert monopolized me in conversation, virtually oblivious to everyone sitting around him, including his wife, but with the exception of Megan, who sat between us. He spent almost the entire meal asking me pointed questions about my travels. I almost felt like I was in a witness box. Well, he was a top-class barrister used to cross-examination. Well, we'll see how they handle it, won't we? Albert commented, leaning back in his chair as the master of ceremonies called for silence for the formal toasts. Grandpa Tamsin, who had organized and, one must assume, paid for the party, stood up and gave a brief welcome speech. And then the old chap took me by surprise, calling on the father of the bride to say a few words and propose a toast to the happy couple. Judging by the look on Witch and Tamsin's faces, his proposal was not part of the master plan and was not approved. And it certainly didn't elicit universal approval. As I said, the old fool caught me completely confused and totally unprepared. So I had to quickly pull myself together and act at random. I really don't remember much of what I said that day. I think I started by mumbling about unfortunate circumstances or something like that, but then I started talking about Tamsin, inserting just about every humorous incident of her life that I know of into the speech. Anyway, the speech must have been pretty good, and, I assume, prepared in advance, because I was shocked to find that the whole damn room erupted into fits of laughter. Perhaps it was because I was making such a fool of myself that they were laughing at me. But even the witch's face cracked at some point in my musings. Then, remembering that I was breaking the magical rule of 7 minutes, yes, I kept my eyes on the clock. Never had the minute hand moved so slowly. I proposed a toast to my new son-in-law and his beautiful bride, and then threw the ball into the groom's yard. That was great, Billy. How long have you been preparing that speech? Megan asked as I lowered myself into my seat. Was it good? I asked, not believing I'd managed to pull it off. With a capital letter, with a capital letter, with a capital letter, with a capital letter, my boy. Albert repeated. With turns like that, you could make a fortune in after-dinner speeches. Looking at the burly Albert, I realized that he knew what he was talking about when it came to after-dinner speeches, and breathed a sigh of relief. I don't know exactly what happened afterwards, but I do know that there seemed to be an endless round of people jumping to their feet and reciting surprisingly long and often unintelligent dissertations. There were also toasts to all the Toms, Dicks, and Harrys you can think of, including the Queen. I'm not quite sure how she fit into the equation. Perhaps someone was trying to complete a seemingly endless cycle of mundane speeches. I noted that none of the speakers could match my own performance. Come along, my boy. I've selected and reserved a small corner, Albert said as people finally began to leave the dining room. It was at this point that I began to suspect that Megan and her uncle Albert had somehow pre-planned my day. Perhaps it was only a rough sketch, but they both clearly knew what they were doing and seemed to be working in unison. Uncle Albert's wife never spoke to me much, but smiled pleasantly whenever our gazes met. Megan, taking my right hand firmly in hers again, led me into the next room and sat me at a table near the bar. Oddly enough, for a wedding reception, the table was in a separate small area, the kind of place you'd find in high-end nightclubs. I'd always considered such places pretentious and felt out of place here. A young woman who appeared to be Albert's personal waitress appeared quickly and took our drink orders. I noticed that almost everyone else had to queue up at the bar to get refreshments. Only a few of them managed to catch a glimpse of the young woman as they tried to place their order. I also noticed that there was a similar barrier at the far end of the hall, but for now it remained empty. Later, I noticed that the witch, her husband, and the groom's parents periodically retreated there. Soon after we were served our first round of drinks, Sir Albert Stone began to preside over the proceedings. Numerous younger members of the Stone clan, some of whom I met at my own wedding many years ago, arrived, introduced their mostly adorable but occasionally hideous offspring to Uncle Albert. Then, after carefully raising their hats to the patriarch of the family, they would disappear into the crowd. This pointless pantomime made me stupidly bored and went on for probably about an hour. All this time, Albert did nothing but repeat his favorite phrase, capital, capital, capital. Sometimes he even added a third capital to make it more convincing. Honestly, if it wasn't so ridiculous, it could have been funny. I tried to ignore the pantomime and probably would have backed off if Megan hadn't clutched at my arm as hard as she could. And unfortunately, Albert decided to make sure that all of our visitors were reminded and, in some cases, informed that I was Tamsin's biological father. I think Albert wanted to let those who thought otherwise know that he had decided to revoke my former status as a family pariah. Whenever I tried to ignore what was going on nearby while chatting with Megan, Albert would introduce me to another family member, whether I knew him or not. There was one brief interlude of submission as her new husband spun Tamsin around the dance floor. No, no one asked me to dance during that time, which in a way was very convenient, because I'm not much for old formalities, especially when me and my partner are the center of attention. I suppose that's the last of them, Albert said with relief in his voice, as the last little family group left our enclave. Now, my boy, I think we'd better get down to serious business. We can't have your daughter addressing her father the way she did before. Damn impertinent of her. It would have been nice if you'd been around to get her on her knees and give her a good spanking years ago. She needed that. Heck, her mum needs it too. George has always been too soft on Shona, and then there's young Megan. Oh, hello, Uncle Albert, Megan grumbled. Oh, you weren't so bad, Megan. But you have to admit that sometimes you were an obnoxious child. Sometimes you gave your parents a real dance and song. I was never as bad as Shauna, Uncle. No, I agree with you, Megan. But I'm sure if William had put Shauna on his lap and tanned her back the first time she took selfies, everyone's life would have been a lot easier, including his own. Knowing Shauna, I would have spent most of that time behind bars, Albert. I interjected. Yes, you're right, you probably would have, William. Shauna was on her own and at times showed a distinct lack of common sense and conscience. At times? Megan asked. Yes, but too often. Albert agreed. Be that as it may, young man, it's time to mend your relationship with your daughter. Albert gave a cursory wave of his hand, and our waitress appeared. He whispered something to her that I couldn't catch, and then she disappeared again. After a few minutes, Albert suddenly rose to his feet and ordered, Come on, you two. We can't do this in front of the whole world and his wife. It might get unseemly. The large man then headed towards the main lobby. The crowd on the dance floor magically cleared a path in front of him. Megan, still clutching my right hand in an iron grip, led me behind him. I think I'd said before that this day felt like it had been pre-planned. This feeling was reinforced when Albert led me into another, much smaller, and almost completely deserted function room. I found it odd that the young chap guarding the room, he removed the rope blocking the entrance as we approached, turned out to be the same hotel clerk to whom I had thrown a few shillings to gain access to the minstrel's gallery. It was furnished more like a lounge bar than a hall, but without the bar itself. But there were many large sofas, and on one of them, perched in a corner, sat 3 people, 2 men and a woman. For some reason, they looked out of place, and I realized that they were not part of the wedding party. For one thing, they weren't wearing white carnations, and in fact even I managed to steal one before the service started. The woman, at first glance I mistook her for one of the hotel office staff. She looked like a very efficient, and damn attractive, young receptionist. The 2 guys were a different breed altogether. They were well-dressed but no frills, and one of them seemed disturbingly familiar. I thought I'd seen him before and perhaps even talked to him, but I couldn't remember where or when. The second guy was a complete stranger to me, as was the young woman. Ignoring the 3 uninvited guests, Albert made his way to a circular group of sofas. No sooner had he positioned himself and indicated where Megan and I should sit than our waitress appeared with a tray laden with new alcoholic beverages. Uncle Albert. Don't ask me why I chose to address him as Uncle Albert. He's not my uncle, but in this case it felt right. If you don't loosen your drink, I'll be pie. Drunk as a skunk for the rest of the evening. William, drunks fall into a few basic categories. the offensive disputant or debauchee, the tedious talkative drunk, the sleepy drunk, and the nicer, happier drunk. I know you are usually put in the latter category, Albert replied in an authoritative tone and with a disconcerting smile on his face. I had to admit that Albert had correctly described my behavior when I was under the influence of excess alcohol. But I was very curious as to how he could have known this fact. It's not like we revolve in similar circles or anything. Heck, I've never met the man more than 4 or 5 times in my entire life. Oh, you seem to know a lot about me, sir. Of course I do, young man. After everything that's happened, I feel obligated to look out for you. If I could do nothing else, I'd see to it that you didn't get into any more trouble. I don't understand, sir. Enough of the formalities, William. I'm on your side. I've always been on your side. Didn't Megan assure you of that? I must have nodded, or something, because he continued. Capital. Bear with me a little longer, young man, and things will become clear to you. I hope so. I also hope that you will understand my situation and be able to find it in your heart to forgive me for not taking action sooner. There, you've completely confused me. Bertie. My reply brought a smile to the old man's face, but it didn't stay there for long. His gaze moved to the far end of the room. Following his gaze, I saw Veach and George enter the living room. They were quickly followed by Tamsin and her husband. All four of them were invited to sit on the adjacent couches across from us. Albert's gaze returned to the entrance to the living room. It was obvious that he expected someone else to join us. What is the meaning of all this, Bertie? Why have you called us here? We have guests, the witch demanded. Please calm down, Hyacinth. Without your intervention, I'm sure none of this would have been necessary. Shauna was a frivolous girl who made an honest mistake that she was willing to admit until you talked her out of it. I don't know what you're talking about. The witch started to rant, but her husband silenced her. Shut up, Hyacintha. Bertie is quite right, snapped at George. My God, worms, I thought to myself. I never dreamed of such a thing. At that moment, a man in a black suit and dog collar entered the drawing room. I recognized him as another prominent member of the Stone clan. A Roman Catholic priest named Father Connor, clearly of Irish descent. However, I was never able to find out his place in the Stone family tree. As far as I knew, all the other members of the Stone clan were strictly Catholic. Be that as it may, the man was always pleasant to me on the few occasions we met. I should add that whether Father Connor held a different faith or not, he held the same patriarchal position in the family clan as Sir Albert Stone. However, as the crowd gathered in the main hall, I saw Father Connor diligently going around all the family members several times. Albert rose to his feet to greet Father Connor, and then the priest turned to me and shook my hand. I jumped to my feet as soon as Albert got to his feet. I'm glad you decided to attend today, William. You did a fine job with the speech, young man. Your daughter was certainly surprised to learn that you know her life story so well. Father Connor cast a quick glance at Tamsin as he spoke. The daughter looked a little embarrassed. Thank you, Father. I hope you are doing well. Everything is as God intended, William. So, Megan, have you been avoiding me today? The good father turned his attention elsewhere. I waited patiently for him to finish with Megan, and then we all sat down at the table again. Uncle Albert cleared his throat noisily, effectively saying, "Now let's get down to business." But it was Father Connor who spoke first. Bertie, you do realize that confession must be confidential, don't you? Absolutely, Joe, replied Albert. Until recently, my actions have been similarly restricted. However, it seems to me that I can think of a way out of our common predicament. Very well. So long as everyone realizes that I cannot divulge anything that has been told to me in confidence, Father Connor repeated. Albert looked at Tamsin in a friendly way. Tamsin, will you refuse me a favor? I want you to pretend that we are in a courtroom and that you are testifying. You are under oath, if you understand me. Yes, Uncle Bertie, but I'm not, Tamsin began to reply. I don't expect you to understand, Tamsin. Not yet. I hope it will soon become clear to you. If not, all this pantomime will prove to be a waste of time. I just want you to answer my questions as fully and honestly as you can under the circumstances. Anything I ask you to say will be said in words anyway, so it won't have any force in court. So you're joking? Of course I'm joking, Uncle Bertie. Now I want you to tell us everything you know about the breakdown of your parents' marriage. Wait, Bertie? I tried to interject. Shut up, Billy. This is my playpen. Albert threatened me. To be honest, I was quite taken aback by this rebuke. Not so much because of Albert's sharp remark, more because of the fact that he addressed me as Billy. Now, Tamsin, if you would be so kind, Albert continued. Albert, she was just a little girl then. You demand too much of Tamsin, exclaimed the witch. You know, you're probably right, Hyacinth. Albert agreed. Why don't you tell us the story? As I recall, you went there and were old enough to know what was going on. I'm sure you've repeated the story often enough over the years to know it by heart. I don't think I can, replied the witch. For the first time ever, I could see that she was unsure of herself and even looked embarrassed. Oh, but I'm sure you can, Hyacintha. Your speeches against Wilhelm have been your part of the party for years. The obvious. Albert's attacks on her grandmother stirred something in Tamsin. She straightened up sharply. I'll do it, Tamsin started to say, but Albert stopped her. Albert seemed adamant that the story be told by a witch. I don't understand why, but I have to assume that Albert's initial request for Tamsin to tell the story was some sort of legal trick designed to achieve I don't know what. How legal brains work is often a mystery to us mere mortals. Eventually, the witch gave in, though she averted her eyes from my gaze the entire time she spoke. I will not repeat Hyacinth's words. Some of what she recounted was completely out of chronological order, and even more had nothing to do with the actual events of the time, mother and daughter. Nevertheless, I will try to retell the main points of the story as it was told by the witch that day. The witch's diatribe. Shauna and William had already been in America for several months working on the film. For Shauna, it was her first feature film, and William was working as an assistant cameraman or something like that. Larry Parker, the director of the film, was very impressed with Shauna's acting ability and told me that she was about to become a big star. We thought it was going so well. When she called home, Shauna was very excited to have a big chance to be in the film. However, when 18-month-old Tamsin came with her, things got a little more complicated. Shauna told us that a few of the girls on set were very responsive and looked after Tamsin when she was on set. But one night, everything changed. We got a call that William had gone out and drunk himself unconscious. He had returned to the cabin he and Shauna shared, where she was rehearsing her lines for the next day's filming with Larry's help. For some inexplicable reason, William became enraged and lashed out at Shauna and poor Larry, breaking a chair leg. Fortunately, Larry managed to overpower William and knock him out before he could kill them both. From what I understand, William was completely out of it. However, Larry couldn't stop William from breaking Shauna's cheekbone. Poor Larry had a hard time too because William gave him a very nasty black eye. The police, of course, prosecuted William for assault, but I brought Tamsin back to my place in the UK before the case went to court. I know he was sent to prison, but I don't know for how long. And of course, after serving his sentence, he was deported back to the UK. After William beat her, Shauna divorced William. What else was the poor child to do? No woman should have to endure such treatment from her husband. Shauna was to get another, much bigger role in a film that was to be shot in Hollywood. Larry had arranged it, but her face never healed before filming began, and she lost that opportunity. William's rampage that night robbed Shauna of the chance to be the successful actress she should have been. The poor girl was so terrified of what William would do when he returned to the country that we were forced to get a court order forbidding him from going near her. As we all know, there have been several legal battles over the years, but from that day to this day, we have not seen William outside the courtroom. The witch, looking quite pleased with herself, leaned back on the back of the couch, effectively announcing that the story was over. But I noticed that she still wasn't looking me in the eye. I was sure she couldn't have done that, as she was well aware that the story she had just told was neither a complete nor an accurate representation of the events that had taken place in the States that weekend. I didn't sit silently and listen to the Witcher's dialogue as Albert wanted me to. Several times I had to object, adding or correcting details that the Witcher either ignored or was unaware of. Megan, however, still clinging tightly to my right hand, seemed to sense every time I began to lose patience. She squeezed my hand, and almost at the same instant, apparently they were communicating somehow, her Uncle Albert signaled me to shut up. "You seem to be a very rowdy drunk, William," Albert remarked. Albert said, "I find that very hard to believe. It's also rather strange that you managed to stay out of jail." Must be 22 years now? I nodded, confirming Albert's assessment. It's rather odd that I haven't received any reports of you losing control of your emotions while under the influence of drugs. For the information of those not in the know, William has been monitored by some aides for years. And for some time now, William has been, well, let's face it, a little aggressive. Be that as it may, I have a feeling that William's interpretation of events will have a slightly different connotation. Why don't you enlighten us as to what you think of that ill-fated weekend, William? I unhooked Megan from my arm and shifted slightly in my seat. I didn't want her interrupting me or interfering with my thoughts. Besides, I suddenly felt naked without the comforting feeling of Megan beside me. Then I looked directly at Tamsin, because she was the one I needed to understand. What your grandmother said was wrong from the start. A friend asked me to be the second cameraman on that film. It was supposed to be an action film set in a mountainous area. The second camera crew had to shoot all the long shots, often with stunt doubles instead of the main actors. That was always my forte, long shots and working on the phone. They only paid for Shauna to fly to the States because I refused to fly without her. I saw it as a nice free holiday for Shauna. The film crew rented a winter holiday complex of sorts. It probably came to them on the cheap, as filming took place outside the regular season. I didn't think for a minute that they would ask Sean to replace an actor who broke his leg on the first day of filming. Admittedly, they had to get a little creative to turn a small role into a female character. Shauna had already starred in several TV adverts, so she was in the right place at the right time. It was cheaper to use her than to find her and fly her on a plane with another actor. Oh, they cut her skiing scene. One bitten, two shy, if you know what I mean. I had absolutely no idea what was going on behind my back, even though I knew Larry Parker was probably having fun with some naive girl on set. That's just the way Larry is. He was notorious in the industry for his antics. Besides, I considered Parker my friend, and was wrong in thinking that friends don't seduce other friends' wives. That Friday, we finished shooting on set. Everything else had to be shot in the studio. Shauna's character was not required for the shoot. It was a very small role. Anyway, on Friday afternoon, me and the rest of my crew had to pack up all the equipment so it was ready to be returned to the rental company. All technical equipment is rented on an as-needed basis. Overall, the packing process went better than planned, and we packed everything up much faster than I expected. I got back to the cabin that Shauna and I shared around 5:30. I didn't think I'd be back there before 10 in the evening. But when I got there, it was empty. No loving wife, no sleeping baby. All I found was a note. This note. I pulled out my wallet and held out the tattered piece of paper to Tamsin. Albert, however, took it from my hands. He slowly and very carefully unfolded the rest of the document. Then he read aloud the words scrawled on it. Billy, I'm going away with Larry. He loves me and is going to make me a big star in Hollywood. Please don't follow us and make a fuss. Shauna. Short and to the point. Albert commented, Go on, William, but I think we all realize where this is going. The filming on location is finished, you say? Yes, sir, finished. I replied. Then it turns out that Shauna is rehearsing lines for the next day's plot, doesn't it? But go on anyway, lad. Let's get to the fun part. You've only got his word for it, Vit shouted. How do you know he isn't lying? Very true, Hyacinth. Albert agreed. Let's see if we can verify a few facts. Albert looked towards the three strangers. Reginald, would you be so kind? The man I didn't recognize stood up and walked towards us carrying a briefcase in his hands. Sir. He addressed Albert once he had come a comfortable distance. Do you have copies of the script for this film? Reginald answered nothing. He pulled a folder out of his briefcase and held it out to Albert. Albert didn't even bother to open the folder, just tossed it onto the coffee table with the couches around it. If anyone wishes to dispute Willem's story, they will find that it is corroborated by the contents of this folder. Now continue, William, please. For a few seconds I was confused, interrupting my train of thought. I had to literally calm my emotions before I could continue. When I found that note, I was terrified and in apoplexy. Yes, and I took a couple of drinks to calm my nerves. But then I realized that I shouldn't have gone back to camp tonight. What's more, I remembered seeing Larry's rented car parked outside his cabin when we got back to camp. Then it occurred to me that Shauna and Larry might have miscalculated. They thought they'd have time to leave before I found that note. I have no idea what would have been the more prudent thing to do under the circumstances. All I know is that I wanted at least an explanation from Shauna as to what kind of game she was playing. Parker, I was sure, would dump Shauna as soon as another stupid slut caught his eye. I really couldn't believe that Shauna had forgotten everything I had told her about the man's behavior. I wasn't stupid enough to introduce my wife to Parker without preparing her beforehand. And when that vile type turned on the charm, even the blood-sucking birds in the trees flew to him. Anyway, I found them in the kitchen of Larry's cabin. Parker was of no interest to me. I could straighten him out at any moment. He couldn't hide from me for long and stay in the industry, if you know what I mean. I wanted Shauna to explain why she didn't take my warning seriously. However, Larry Parker misjudged my intentions. Perhaps he has been pursued by other spouses in the past. In any case, to be honest, he came at me like the proverbial bull at a china shop. I managed to dodge to the side, and Parker whizzed past me and smashed into the back door, shattering the glass in the process. For a moment, I thought Parker was trying to get away. It was later argued in court that I broke the glass by sneaking into the cab. The fact that the shards were on the floor outside and that I had no cuts on my arm while Larry had them was apparently ignored. Of course, it didn't help that I didn't remember much about the day I first regained consciousness, and I didn't for several years, but now I can remember everything in great detail. I don't know how one can describe Larry Parker's fighting technique because it doesn't fit into any category I know of. Anyway, as soon as he recovered from his collision with the door, he lunged at me again. I dodged again, but managed to hit him once as he passed me. I figured it would cool his ardor a bit or something. Big mistake, my punch changed the direction of his rampage. Parker collided with Shauna and they collapsed to the floor. Shauna, to my surprise, was still sitting on the chair next to the bar. Apparently, it was the same chair that didn't survive the collision. Actually, I thought Parker was out of the game, and Shauna didn't look too smart. So I pulled Parker off of her and helped Shauna to her feet. I remember Shauna looking me in the eye. Apparently, she was really stunned. And then the damn lights went out. When I woke up 4 days later, I found myself confined to a hospital bed. I remembered nothing of the day in question or the several days that preceded it. Memories that were to return, I will add, very slowly, over the months and years that followed. Be that as it may, Tamsin, these are my memories of that fateful day. Everything that has happened since then has been completely out of my control. I have no idea who or what hit me, and I have come to the conclusion that it was Larry Parker's head that broke your mother's cheekbone when he crashed into her. I surmise that he was the one who hit me in the head, fracturing my skull, with the leg from the broken chair Shauna was sitting on. Why those two decided to blame me for the fight, I have no idea. And because your mother, with the help of her lawyers, made sure I didn't get close enough to ask her. I learned that Larry Parker was found dead, from bullet wounds, in a motel room in Los Angeles while I was still enjoying the hospitality of the American legal system, so I couldn't ask him about it. I strongly suspect that Parker decided to sleep with the wrong spouse. Larry Parker seems to have discovered that some Yanks can be extremely possessive and quite vindictive. Plus, they can be very vigorous in their handling of firearms. I leaned back on the back of the couch, unable to add anything else lest I appear too vindictive towards my daughter's mother. Megan clutched at my right hand again and kissed my cheek in surprise. Tamsin sat staring at me in silence. It seemed like she was trying to look right into my brain. Suddenly, she shifted her gaze to Albert. "Well, you know what really happened, don't you, Uncle Albert? Mum told you, didn't she?" Then Tamsin instantly shifted her penetrating gaze to Connor's father. "She told you, too." "She told me, my child, but like your Uncle Albert, our hands are tied," Father Connor replied. "We cannot divulge what has been told to us in the strictest secrecy. In my case, it is a confession. In Albert's case, attorney's privilege," Tasman's new husband added. It was then that I realized for the first time that this man spoke American. His mother and father were definitely not American. In the British legal system, we use a different term, young man, but essentially, it boils down to the same restriction of action, Albert assured him. "Tamsin, I'm sure your mother wouldn't lie to you." The witch made her decision. Tamsin jumped to her feet and cast a hostile glare at her grandmother. She shifted so that she was looking her grandmother directly in the eyes. Me too, grandmother. But my mother never explained to me what happened then. What I know, I learned elsewhere. Whenever I asked my mother about it, she always changed the subject or went off in another direction. Suddenly, Tamsin spun on her heels, walked across the room to where the three strangers were sitting, and turned to the man who seemed familiar. I recognize you, don't I? Hey, she demanded. Yes, young lady, perhaps you will, replied the man. Uncle Albert hinted that someone was looking after me, and I remembered seeing you more than once at my school. I'm also sure I saw you a few times in Bristol when I was at university. That's possible, miss, the man agreed. So, given that my uncle has hinted that someone is following my father as well, and I know that Reginald and Shirley work in my Uncle Albert's London office, I suspect that you are the one who has been following my father as much as I have. Am I right? As you should be, yes, miss, you are right, the man replied. So who are you, a private investigator? I'm a retired police officer, miss, the one your uncle turns to when he requires my specialized services. Tamsin turned round, looked me straight in the eye, and grinned. Then she turned to the man again. I assume you have studied the events of that evening very carefully, ever in the past? The man confirmed with a nod of his head that he had. Then please tell me, do you consider my father an honest man? Has he not deceived us today? Not to my knowledge, miss, the man replied. Thank you, officer. I'm sorry you didn't give your name. Sergeant White is retired, miss. Yeoman to my friends. Thank you, yeoman. Why Uncle Bertie didn't send you to tell me the truth, I don't understand. I only do what is asked of me, miss. And could you shed some light on why my Uncle Albert had to keep quiet for so long, Mel? I can only speculate, miss, but I believe your uncle was defending a certain unnamed person against a charge of perjury. But why would she perjure herself at all? That I can't tell you, miss. But I can tell you that a film producer cannot promote a young actress if he himself is in prison on a charge of grievous bodily harm, or whatever it's called in America. Suddenly it all made sense, Tamsin exclaimed. How long have you known your father? She asked, turning to look at me. No, Tamsin, but that's what I assumed, I replied. I don't know how seriously your mother was hurt that night, but I wasn't sure from the beginning that she remembered the events as clearly as she claimed in court. Perhaps Shauna repeated to the police the story Parker told her. Tamsin turned to Petty again. May I invite you and your assistants to be my husbands and guests of honor for the rest of the evening? She asked. All three of them thanked Tamsin, whereupon she literally pushed them out into the main hall. She then slowly walked across the hall to us and looked me straight in the eye. Tamsin, the witch began, stepping closer. Please don't talk to me right now, grandmother. I'm too angry, and I might say something I'll regret later. Grandfather, would you be so kind as to see your wife off and attend to your guests? Paul and I will be leaving soon. Without a word, George lifted the witch to her feet and led her down the road. Tamsin walked over and hugged Father Connor and then Uncle Albert. She didn't speak to them, just hugged them. Then she turned to Megan and to me. Can I take your mind off my father for a moment, Aunt Megan? I'd like to talk to him alone. She then turned to her husband. Paul, Aunt Megan likes to dance. The boy understood, and so did Megan. As soon as they were out in the main hall, Tamsin and I, Tamsin ran me just as Megan had done all day, headed out into the hotel gardens. For a very long time, Tamsin was silent, only holding my left hand tightly. But finally, she asked, How can I begin to apologize to you, Father? Slightly embarrassed, I asked, For what, baby? She stopped, and I turned to face her. Well, I guess for the way I talked to you earlier. But I feel like I have a lot to apologize to you for. If I could just figure out exactly what for, I'd feel a lot happier. The truth is, kid, you're the one who should be apologizing. You and I are the victims. All we have to do now is make up for lost time. I replied, You don't look very angry, Father. I've had many years to learn that anger doesn't make things better, Tamsin. What it can do, though, is get you into very serious trouble. Believe me, I've been through it before. But Grandma, your grandmother has never liked me, Tamsin, ever since your mom and I started courting. But why? What did you do that upset her? I was born on the side your grandmother considers wrong, Tamsin, and I courted her daughter. Snobbery, plain and simple. Am I going to enjoy my father looking over my shoulder? I hope so, little one. But I won't be able to be around all the time since most of my work involves Antarctica. I'm there most of the year. Somehow, I don't think my Aunt Megan would like that. She seems to have a bit of a crush on you. What happened to her husband? I think she got married, I asked. Okay, that's not true. Megan hinted that she was married. I just wanted to get a little bit of history without asking her. Tamsin chuckled. Oh yeah, that's right. He was a handsome bloke too, but too skilled with his fists. What do you mean? They were arguing about something and he hit Megan. God, what did she do? Dad, do you remember Aunt Megan telling you how she was bullied at school? Yes, that's right. I took her to the gym and taught her how to defend herself. Megan's ex-husband felt the effects of your instruction. He was taken away in an ambulance. Shit, was Megan hurt? Uncle Bertie's handling the case. Her ex got 2 years probation. That's good to hear. I'd hate to be the cause of the breakdown in Megan's life. She was a good kid. Do you like my Aunt Megan, Father? I can see she's partial to you. I always liked Megan, Tamsin. But she was your mother's younger sister, who was my fiancée and then my wife, remember? Younger sister. You have to control your emotions under these circumstances. You said all that very much like Uncle Bertie, Father. Hell, Dad, that's what I said, and it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. You're my daddy from now on, okay? I don't mind, baby. Tamsin wrapped her arms around my neck, pulled me to her, and kissed my cheek. I'll enjoy hearing my nickname Kiddo every time you say it, Daddy. But, as I was saying, or rather tried to say, my mom's dead, and so is Daddy, and so is Aunt Megan. Well, I always liked my Aunt Megan. Can I count on a sort of seal of approval, Tamsin? I asked. Have no doubt, Daddy, you'll go for it. Don't jump to conclusions, Tamsin. Megan is recalling the character of her older brother, not her lover. The two are not necessarily interchangeable. Uncle Bertie has spoken again. Let's go back to the house. I want to brag about Daddy to all my friends. What about your new husband? Paul left me alone for a fortnight on a cruise ship. He has nothing to complain about. We went back to the house and I was introduced to hundreds of young people. I didn't spot Megan, who I hoped would rescue me, but eventually Bertie appeared beside me. Tamsin looked a little reluctant, but eventually agreed that I could walk with Bertie. In fact, as I realized, Bertie needed a cover as he slipped outside for a cigar. Apparently, Bertie's very quiet wife does not approve of his smoking. We stepped out onto the patio, and Bertie lit a cigar. You do realize I'll never be able to get Shauna to sit on this, William, don't you? He said. Bertie, I may be a fool, but I'm not. She really was something special, wasn't she? Yes, she was. And she was terribly afraid of going to prison, especially an American prison. I wonder, she would have been jailed for perjury. She must have hit her head hard to break her cheekbone like that. In an English court, I doubt it. But in an American court, not likely. Hyacinth frightened Shauna that she would be sent to prison anyway. And Shauna witnessed your trial on the railway. I read the transcript, William. It was small-town justice that left a lot to be desired. A decent appeal won't hurt you. Bertie, by the time I figured it all out, I should have been released anyway. An appeal would have forced Sean to go in the opposite direction, especially since Larry Parker was dead. You know better than anyone how some legal moguls look at things when they find out they've been cheated. Some bastard should pay. You're a sentimental fool, William. Hark, who's talking? I replied. Albert took one last puff of his cigar and crushed it against the balustrade. Don't say that to the Mem Sahib, William, or I'll be castrated. Now we'd better get back to the house before Megan goes on another rampage. That girl is partial to you, young man. I've noticed, Bertie, I've noticed. Capital, 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 he replied as we returned to the function room. It wasn't until Tamsin and Paul disappeared into the bridal room that I realized I didn't have a reservation for this evening. The original plan was for me to return to the rented cottage on the south coast that I called home. Don't worry, I have a spare bed in my room, you can use it. Megan, aren't you rushing things a little too fast? You know you need to hurry up. Hey, watch it, stud. I've seen you in action before and I want it to be the same this time? What do you mean you've seen me in action? You said it yourself, Billy. I'm particularly good at sneaking around, and more than once I've been able to sneak up on people and watch them. Your little hideout in the woods turned out not to be as big a secret as you and Shauna thought. Damn it. You're a pervert, Megan. You want to see perversion, I'll show you perversion. Come to my room. When I opened my eyes, I saw Megan's smiling face. Come round yet? She asked. Damn, girl, you don't do things by halves, do you? I only had one night I could be sure of, Billy. I had to make sure you understood what you were offering on a regular basis. Is that some kind of offer, Megan? I asked. Of course, love. And I can get Father Connor here quickly to make it official if you'll let me. Father Connor is a Roman Catholic, Megan, and we're both from the Church of England, aren't we? Details, 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 details. I thought you were a sailor, Billy. Yes, but what's that got to do with the price of apples? Any port in a storm, lover. I'd marry a bleeding rabbi if you asked me to. Besides, I have this. Megan held out the envelope to me. And please tell me, what's in this envelope, Megan? 2 cruise tickets to the same luxury suite my old uncle paid for. And it just so happens to be the same cruise where one man's daughter and her new husband will be spending their honeymoon. Okay, you can date your daughter during the day and we'll party every night. Megan, when did you and good old Bertie start planning this Shanghai exercise or whatever you call it? To be completely honest with you, Billy, Bertie came up with the basic plan after Shauna's funeral. Of course, my Uncle Bertie didn't envisage me seducing you. It was purely my idea, and it fell under the heading of preferred outcome. So, what do you think of this cruise? I looked down again and saw the wistful expression on Megan's face. I think I'm going to enjoy my holiday, darling. However, we won't have time to get our marriage license before the ship leaves. Don't worry, Billy. I checked. It's registered in Bermuda. What does that mean, a fact? You'll find out soon enough, hubby. You'll find out. Now, how would you like another walk around the deck before breakfast? She smirked. I grinned back at Megan. We only had time for breakfast that morning. Life goes on. C'est la vie epilogue. Megan and I didn't get married on the ship. Although she and I were fine with it, Bertie's wife didn't want to do it. For such an outwardly modest old lady, Beatrice could be very bossy when she wanted to be. Not surprising, considering who she'd been married to since time immemorial. Beatrice organized our marriage. I'm sure it was paid for by Bertie himself. Of course, it wasn't as lavish as Tamsin's, but neither Megan nor I wanted it to be. Frankly, we'd both have preferred a private affair aboard the ship with Tamsin and Paul as witnesses. The witch didn't attend our wedding, but Megan's father had given her away in marriage. He even said, "This is making a habit of it, William," while handing me his daughter's hand in marriage. Bertie spent the entire day with a huge grin on his face. During his speech, he even stated that he was the one responsible for bringing the bride and groom together, which I suppose was pretty much the case. Although I believe Megan's determination would have eventually brought us together some other way if I hadn't snuck into Tamsin's wedding. My wife, when she knows what she wants, seems capable of moving mountains to achieve it. She can certainly bend Uncle Bertie to her will, and it's not that difficult. Her only problem is that Megan spends a lot of time thinking, like, should we get up now? Or should we sit on the deck a little longer first? This, I assure you, is wreaking havoc on my work schedule. And it's not too good for my back. I'm not as young as I used to be. And it doesn't matter that my wife wants to believe otherwise. Yeah, but I don't work in the South Seas anymore. Bertie knew someone who was acquainted with someone whose brother is a commissioned producer, or something like that, in the BBC's wildlife department. I suddenly discovered that Megan's phone was flooded with offers for wildlife filming. Mostly in the UK, and all moderately lucrative. Basically, just what I needed. Megan and I decided that kids weren't a problem. We feel like with the Tamsin twins, we'll have enough to worry about. That's assuming she and Paul don't play football. We settled into a quaint little bungalow around the corner from Paul and Tamsin's house. A convenient distance to push the pram. And Bertie was pushing Paul and me to the local golf club. Sunday mornings with the 4 of us became a regular occurrence. The 4th member of the club? George, of course. Now that he and the witch are no longer husband and wife, he has been elevated or restored to the position of second granddad in my daughter's eyes. Bertie, of course, takes precedence. Well, since he's the patriarch of the family, what did you expect? Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.